into the sea, mountains into the sea.
Welcome to the Our State Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. In this episode, we talk with Charles Frazier, author of Cold Mountain, about growing up in Western North Carolina and how it inspired the novel that has become an American classic.
Mountains in the sea.
We thought it was important to start our first two episodes with a writer who has written not only one of the most important novels in North Carolina literature, but one of the most iconic novels in all of American literature. Our guest is National Book Award winner and North Carolina native Charles Frazier, author of Cold Mountain and most recently, The Trackers. Welcome, Charles. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Wally.
So we're sitting in Asheville, North Carolina right now, and this is the city where you were born, not too far, I guess, west as the crow flies, down there in Biltmore Village from where we are. Can you tell me a little bit about where you were raised and what your memories are of Western North Carolina?
And when I was, not even a year old, my father got a job as a school administrator over in Cherokee County at that very western tip of North Carolina. We moved there and stayed there till I was about a junior in high school. It was a beautiful little town surrounded by mountains, a really delightful place to grow up. Lots of characters, lots of outdoors, a safe place that little kids could just run around wild.
Is there any particular memories or any particular characters that you can draw a straight line from an experience that you had to something that you wrote about?
Well, school teachers. All of my school teachers in the first 7 grades were women, and they were smart. I thought of them as old ladies because, I was a kid. They weren't that old. They were in their late 30s and 40s. But they were tough. They didn't take anything off of you, and they were, and they expected stuff from you. They made it clear, we know what you're capable of, and they did this with all the kids, and you're going to live up to that, or we're going to make your life miserable during the school day. You're going to have to do this. And so I think there are a lot of older women in my books that owe a lot to that handful of school teachers.
There are some older wise and even not so old wise women in your novels that I could rattle off right now. Was there anybody, you just mentioned teachers, was there anybody, because I get this question sometimes. I was raised in Gastonia, just down the mountain, and sometimes people are surprised that a writer would come from Gastonia, and maybe people are surprised that a writer would come from Franklin or Andrews or somewhere that far out west in North Carolina. But what were the conditions? What are the conditions that created you? Like in North Carolina, I can think about, in Gastonia, I can think about the mills shutting down. I can think about kind of a restless economic population. I can think about the diversity that I grew up around. And I can trace some of that to the things that I'm interested in writing about. So what were the conditions and the people that kind of created or instilled in you this desire to write stories?
Some of it was the mixture of people, 1,200 people. In that little town over in Andrews, and I ran into a guy who was the son of one of the doctors in town. There were 2 doctors, and he said that one of his father's friends, when he was a kid, would come up to spend the weekend in Andrews, and said at some point, he was from Atlanta, and said, "I know more interesting, educated, intelligent people in this little mountain town than I do in Atlanta." And so there was that kind of range. And then there were real old-time mountaineers there who lived like it was, 1895.
Mm-hmm.
And that range of people. And I was a very free-range little kid. Somebody that I knew in Andrews back then who was a little older than I was, I saw her a few years ago, and she said, by the time you were 5 or 6 years old, I bet you had been in every house in that town.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you just go to people's houses and knock on the door and go get a glass of water. Or
Were you aware of soaking things up then? Were you aware of the writer's ear? I tell my students, I teach at UNC Asheville, I tell my writing students, you got to have a sticky brain. Yeah. Were you aware of that then?
I doubt that I was, though I was really... I was just interested in people. If I didn't have anything else to do, I'd go down to the Ford dealership on Main Street and watch guys work on cars. When I was 6. And I remember one of our teachers bringing some things from old time Andrews to class one day, and one of them was an iron. And there were those cast iron irons that had a hollow space. And you'd put fire coals in them. Mm-hmm. And I was really curious about that for some reason. I think I just wanted to know if that worked. And so at the end of the day, I said, could I borrow that iron? And I went around to houses till I found somebody with a fire going and said, can I fill up my iron with coals?
That's amazing. I wonder when Cold Mountain came out if they were like, oh, that's the boy that came around looking for coal.
Yeah.
I'm glad he made something of himself. That's the Frazier boy, kid. The coal kid. You just mentioned doctors, and something that I bet a lot of people don't know about the two of us, Charles, is that we're both doctors without any kind of credibility in terms of healing anybody or making anybody feel better. We're both doctors of American literature. And I'm wondering how your extensive schooling, which I can also speak to, but your extensive schooling from Chapel Hill to Appalachian State to the University of South Carolina, how did that prepare you to become the writer that you are, that background, that deep immersion in literature?
First, I'll have to tell you a line that somebody said to me, a kid. I was a summer job when I was in graduate school, and this kid I was working with painting said, asked what I did, and I said, well, I'm in school. I'm working on a doctorate. And he said, what kind of doctor? And I said, yeah, in literature. And he said, so not the kind of doctor that helps people.
Well, when my mom, when I finished my PhD at graduation, I gave my parents a card thanking them for their support of me trying to do this crazy thing. And I said, I am now a doctor, and I can't keep you out of a nursing home, but I can read to you when you get in one. Right? So I have, But how did that prepare you?
I had a professor in the PhD program who really put a lot of weight on the whole context of a novel. He was not one of those literary scholars that thought, as so many of them did at that time, that nothing outside the text matters. Mm. If I was reading a Dickens novel, he would ask me questions about the sewage system in London at the time, that kind of thing. And I loved it. I loved that kind of work. I loved that approach to reading a writer like Dickens. And I learned a lot about how to find that kind of information in the kinds of books I've written, especially Cold Mountain and 13 Moons. That was so valuable to have that experience and to be really skillful in using a library. And a lot of that stuff, even today, even with the internet, there's still a lot of stuff that's not digitized.
Yeah. I want to talk about, we just talked about research, but one of the things that you did, or you just talked about research, one of the things that you did while you were writing Cold Mountain, you were full-time dadding, which I know something about right now while my wife is in graduate school. You were full-time dadding with your daughter, Annie, and when she would get home from school, you would ask her to often read to you what you had read that day, because you wanted to hear it in someone else's voice. And Annie has really been integral to your writing career in really some wonderful ways, and she's such a great writer and a well-published writer. Can you talk about how the two of you work together? I just find that so interesting, and maybe it's aspirational because I have 2 daughters, and I want them to always be part of my life. So can you talk about that?
Well, it's depending on what stage a book is in. Like right now, she's working on a book, I'm working on a book. We're both not quite at that point where you're just sitting down every day getting 500 words in or whatever. It's still working on the ideas. So we've been trying and not always succeeding to have a writer's walk every week. So we go somewhere here around Asheville and take an exercise walk. And like on the way out, we talk about my book. On the way back, we talk about her book, that kind of thing. And it's just throwing out ideas. I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that, and seeing how the other person reacts to it. Later on, like the last year of working on a book, like with the trackers, we were meeting really, really frequently. And she was helping with research. She was, critiquing, saying this is not working the way you think it's working, and it's one of those things that it's so helpful because some editors, they're hesitant to criticize too much, even though I like the editing process, and I'm not terribly fragile on that, or they want to prove a point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not intimidated by you. I'm gonna.
Sure.
And when Annie's reading a book and reading it as an editor, she's neither one of those things. She's looking at the book, and her comments are always based on what would make the book better.
That's so interesting. I bet that only happens, that kind of proving a point or that kind of light editing, that probably only happens to writers who have sold millions of copies. That doesn't happen to me. I don't get hesitant editors at all. They're like, this is trash, throw it away, Wiley. I was interviewing John Grisham once in front of students, and he said, I was talking about showing something to my editor, and John said, you show your editor your work before it's done? I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, John, I'm not John Grisham. I have to show my editor my work before it's done. And I'm in front of all my students, and they're like, what a loser. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be back in just a moment with Charles Frazier. Since we're coming to you today from Asheville, North Carolina, it seems appropriate to share a new book about one of Asheville's finest and most important writers. Wilma Dykeman is the subject of Words in Water, the story of Wilma Dykeman, a picture book for young readers by Shannon Hitchcock with gorgeous illustrations by Sophie Page. Dykeman's childhood in Asheville's Beaver Dam community is featured in the book, but the focus is her groundbreaking 1955 work, The French Broad, a nonfiction study of the history, pollution, and endless possibilities of the French Broad River, a place that she so loved. Find Of Words and Water, the story of Wilma Dykeman now, wherever books are sold. This podcast is produced by Our State Magazine, celebrating North Carolina travel, food, history, and culture since 1933. Check out ourstate.com, where you can explore exclusive content like digital stories, YouTube videos, newsletters, and more. To have each month's issue delivered to your mailbox, visit ourstate.com/subscribe and enter promo code BOOKCLUB, one word, BOOKCLUB. That's BOOKCLUB for $5 off any regular or gift subscription. Welcome back to the Our State Book Club podcast. We're here with Charles Frazier. So Charles, a moment ago, we were talking about Annie reading Cold Mountain back to you and y'all working together. And I'm thinking about how important it is for you to hear the language of the novel that you're working on, to hear it out loud. How does that change from book to book? Because the language in Cold Mountain, the language of the narrator, the voice of the narrator is very different than the voice of the narrator in the trackers. And the feels of the books are very different. How does that process change for you when you know what you want to hear? How do you get there?
Yeah, it takes a while to get to the point where I know what I want to hear, and it took a while with the trackers. But then once I know what I'm after, it really does make a difference to hear it aloud. And I still feel a little silly sometimes sitting in my office reading aloud, but it's just different hearing it and not reading it on the page.
Is that something you try to do? Do you try to write a novel that feels and sounds different every time?
No. I mean, it takes a long time to decide what to do next. And I don't start that process thinking I want to do something different from last time or something like last time or any of that. I'm just trying to think, what can I do that I will commit to 3 or 4 or 5 years of working on? You know, it's just finding that thing to commit to.
You know, sometimes readers ask me questions about something I've written or that has been in one of my novels, and sometimes I don't have an answer for them. Yeah. And they'll say, well, how do you not know you wrote it? And then I have to tell them, well, something for me, whether it's character, desire, or a decision, it has to remain mysterious for me. Otherwise, I can't devote 3, 4, 5 years to sitting with it. Yeah. I've got to try to get to know these people the way you do in a real relationship. You put time into a real relationship to get to know people. If folks want to read my review of the trackers, they can check it out in the April print issue of Our State magazine. This is a great novel, and it's out in paperback now. It takes us pretty far afield from North Carolina, farther than at least your literature has ever gone before geographically. And I know how much you like to travel and how important geographic research is for you. And you wrote a lot of this novel during the pandemic, and you couldn't do that traveling. So how did it feel to be stuck at home at your desk, working on a novel that is set in the open expanses of the West and in the swamps of Florida?
I had such a great trip planned. It was going to be at least a month and probably more of just wandering around out in that sort of high plains, you know, kind of western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, Wyoming, going to little post offices and looking at their Depression era post office murals. Had a big long list, and I was just going to zigzag around out there. And I've done that kind of thing before a little bit. The first writing I did that became Cold Mountain, I had driven across on 2-lane roads across northern Nebraska and eastern Wyoming to get to Jackson Hole, and I just loved Nebraska. I mean, not really you're on many lists of vacation spots, but I love that part of the country. So I started thinking about, well, if I can't get in the car and just drive for a month, I'll think about places where I have gotten in the car in the past. And so a lot of the places I chose to write about with the trackers were just because I could write about them without having to refresh my memory too much or find new stuff. So it ends up being Wyoming, the little towns sort of like Lander, Wyoming, Rawlins, Wyoming, some of those little towns, and then you've got some Seattle and some San Francisco and Highway 1 going down through Jack Kerouac territory down there. and then then a trip to Florida that the main character wishes he never made, probably.
Which is one of my favorite parts in the novel, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode. That wonderful trip that the reader accompanies our main character Val down into Florida during that novel. We're going to close out this episode with some rapid fire North Carolina questions.
Yeah.
And these are designed to get you in trouble with somebody. We don't know who yet, but somebody is going to write Our State Magazine and complain about these answers.
Okay.
And it's not going to just be for you. It's going to be for everyone that I interview and maybe for me. So just don't think, just answer.
All right.
Carolina basketball or Duke?
Carolina.
Favorite vacation spot in North Carolina?
Carolina. Boone, Blowing Rock, that area.
Coleslaw or potato salad?
Coleslaw.
That surprises me. I thought you would be a potato salad guy.
Well, I first thought barbecue, so coleslaw.
I love that you're thinking about the side that's going to accompany the barbecue.
Yeah.
I won't ask you about which region of North Carolina you like barbecue from, because our state will go under. The magazine will fail if I ask that question. Another question. Fried chicken or chicken salad?
Fried chicken.
Thing you miss about North Carolina the most when you're away from home?
The mountains, western North Carolina.
Well, this has been a real pleasure talking with you today for our first episode, Charles. I really appreciate you joining me.
It was fun, Wiley.
So this episode was recorded and produced by Hunter Brady for Our State Magazine. Our music was recorded and produced by Beta Radio from Wilmington, North Carolina. I hope you will join us on our next episode of the Our State Book Club podcast.
What might it be like underneath the sunrise in a state of flight? Coming back on me, it seems wonderful, the wandering mountain birds on a beach. Never moments ever wasted, turning away from your love. Honeybees, gardens of sweeter fruit never tasted, no turning to other things. Will you be, will you see? Sweeter fruit never tasted, don't turn your back on me. Mountains pushing into the sea.